So, hi Richard, it's great to have you here on this really amazing webinar with the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, and Techfest. So to quickly sort of start this webinar, let's just jump right into how 𝗥𝗶𝗰𝗵𝗿 began and how you came up with the idea and how the whole journey sort of started.
Sure. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. This journey started in 2016. There's lots of content out there. I don't know how much we're going to share right today, but there's lots of content out there on our social media everywhere showing that this started with a very crude idea of a tube on my arm with an engine just stuck to it. And I used that to test out what it would feel like to have that thrust attached to you. And actually, it proves that by getting your hands dirty and trying something, it can really teach you a lot. So actually, I felt no gyroscopic moment. There was no torque. It was just really simple force. And from there, I went to an engine on each arm, and then 2 engines on each arm, and then eventually to adding additional engines to my legs, and carried on like exploring and iterating all of that throughout 2016. And this was alongside a day job. I was an oil trader with BP, and I used to be in the British Royal Marines Reserve as well. Eventually by November 2016 got the very first flight to work. It was only 6 seconds and a bit of a wobbly, stumbly flight across this farmyard. But I knew as soon as I landed that the concept worked and that this was the beginning of a journey that had a long way to go.
So that's really amazing to hear. So what's sort of the Jetsuit made out of? Like what makes it fly then? So what's the whole technology behind it?
Yeah, so behind me, we've got a bunch of suits here. So behind me, let's pick this one. That's the backpack. Now, really, if there was a person standing there, that helmet should be facing the other way. It's kind of confusing with it set up that way. On the back, then you've got one engine here that puts out about 55 kilos of thrust. You've got the fuel either side into fuel bladders. And then for each arm, you've got an arm assembly. In fact, I'm going to grab one here. This one actually is a dummy one. So it just means I can wave it around more easily. So on each arm, you've essentially got an arm tube where your arm goes. And then you've got an engine either side. And the reason we have that is because the result of the thrust from the 2 feels like it's going up your arm. If you just had one, it would just torque your arm really uncomfortably. You'd be fighting it the whole time. So the way to think of this is that you've got thrust coming up each arm and thrust on your back. The thrust on your back lifts all the equipment and the fuel, and it lifts a good chunk of your body weight. The rest is on your arms, and it feels like you're just leaning on these engines. And as you squeeze the power and more power comes in, all you're doing is initially just flaring it away, pointing it to the sides, which means that it's not going to lift you, right? Because there's not enough thrust pointing downwards. This is like a kind of high school physics problem. So you're pointing the thrust to the sides, and then as you feel the thrust stop increasing, it's just like a fixed force at that stage. You just lower your arms, and gradually more and more of the power goes down, and you lift up. And then all of the control is a really intuitive kind of action and reaction kind of Newtonian kind of process. So if you want to go that way, you just lift your arm up a little bit and you end up flying that way. It sounds maybe not very intuitive, but then again, describing a bicycle doesn't sound very intuitive, and yet your brain quickly rewires to understand how to ride a bike. It's the same process here, and why we've trained so many people to do this.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. So, I mean, how many people have sort of flown this then? Like how easy it is for someone who's got no experience in flying a jet suit to fly it? And what sort of your vision taking it forward in terms of experiences and the future?
Sure. So we've trained now about 70 or 80 clients in the UK and in LA. The process is you get clipped into a rope tether, which means that you can't kind of fall over, because as you're sort of learning the balance, a bit like riding a bike, instead of falling off the bike and hurting your knee and having another go, we've removed that process. You're just clipped into this rope and can't even fall over. You then get exposed to a very small amount of power, and you realize that, you know, if you point it that way, you go this way, and you can kind of wire your brain usually within probably 3 or 4 goes. Each go is only a couple of minutes long. And then we gradually turn the power up, and you actually do that yourself. You can gradually increase the power and start doing little hops and jumps and feel lighter, and it's very progressive. I think it's probably faster for most people to learn this than skateboarding, rollerblading, learning to ride a bike, certainly quicker than skiing, pretty much any of those balancing kind of challenges, because it's fundamentally really stable. When you're in that position, I mean, look, there's a poster there. We'll be flying there. You can see, you imagine the engine at the back. Here we go. You can see if you draw a straight line out of all of these thrust vectors, it's a super stable kind of pyramid of support. The filming we were just doing this morning, so it's lunchtime here in the UK. We had CNN here this morning. They're filming some documentary. It is blowing 35-mile-an-hour winds out here and raining. And I was up on this hill flying like I didn't matter at all. I was more stable standing in the wind with the engines running, as in, hovering, than I was when I shut the engines down and I was standing on the launch pad. Then I could feel the wind blowing me around. So it's fundamentally very stable. And this is why we've trained so many people to do this. It's really not very difficult. It doesn't take very long to learn.
I mean, that's awesome to hear. And I imagine like the sound of the jet suit kicking up and spooling up is quite visceral and really, really an awesome experience. So it'd be great if you could like take a few minutes to like show us what the jet suit sounds like.
Right. So I'm inside a building here, and much as I'd love to be able to like take off and hover, it would fill the room instantly with hot air, which is not really a problem in itself, but the engines then would produce less power. And the more power I need, the more hot air, and I probably would struggle to get off the ground, and it would destroy my lab. It would just move everything around. So the small alternative is I will start one engine. And I'll just, if people look at Gravity Industries on YouTube, you can see this kind of more spectacularly. Or if you look for Take on Gravity on Instagram, you can see it on there. Oh, and that's on TikTok too. But I think that's now banned in India, isn't it? So maybe
it is.
Yeah. Right, here we go. So let me just plug it in. First time, I'm only going to run one arm engine. So it should be the top engine here. So this is the suit behind me. I'm not going to touch that suit because the arms don't really work like that. Let's just check it's all good. It is all good. So we'll see at what stage I chicken out and turn it off, because this is going to make the room stink. So I'm starting it up. Usually it takes about 45 seconds to start up. The next generation suit only takes 10 seconds. So here we go. It's going to ignite. There you go. Little flame coming out. So it's building the fire. And then it's going to start to accelerate and increase. Here we go. You can see that. It's still not terrible. It's going to get too loud to talk over soon as well. Just open the door so it doesn't smell so much. There you go. That was about as much as I was up for. It would probably run for another 30 seconds or so, maybe 20 seconds, until it would get really loud, go to idle, and then the green light would come on, and then I'd be ready to accelerate it. So you probably heard about 5% of the noise of when you're actually flying, and that's just one engine as well.
Yeah, the flames coming out looks really cool, and I'm pretty sure people who experience the suit feel amazing in it. Just a quick question. So we're aware that one of the really big Bollywood superstars, 𝗥𝗶𝗰𝗵𝗿, came into test and try the suit on. So how was that experience with Gravity?
That was great. Yeah, we've had a lot of people come and do this. And actually, it was really fun to have him over. I know he's done lots of interesting stunt stuff before and spends a lot of time hanging out of helicopters and things like that. So I think this is quite a new experience for him. Again, that film, there's 2 films of that on our Gravity Industries YouTube channel. Yeah, he was great. He was only with us for a short period of time, so only had a couple of goes. But I think, you were there. I think he seemed pretty keen to come back and go through another day of training. And probably by the end of that day, he'd be ready to come off the tether and fly. It's one of those things, once you've got it, again, like watching a child learn to ride a bike, once they've got it, they kind of don't forget it. It's sort of there. But yeah, he was great. He was good fun.
So we've got a few sort of questions coming in that I would like to sort of ask you. So the first one is, what were the difficulties you faced to bring Gravity to a reality once you sort of conceptualized it?
Yeah, good question. So there's one thing having an idea and writing it down and drawing it on a piece of paper where you think it's probably going to work, but it's quite hard to try and identify what are the steps that you can take realistically with your time, your money, and your resources to go and start progressing. And for me, I spent a bit of money on one engine, but it was mostly me making out of aluminium a tube and a grip, and I used a mop bucket to put the fuel tank in. And I'm a firm believer in trying to make each step as simple as possible. I mean, here's a real example I just happen to have knocking around. This is an entirely aluminium printed arm assembly, quite an old one actually. But in terms of how we stow the engines on your sides, like holstering a kind of pistol, I'm using a piece of very simple stock aluminium here to experiment with a new mode of doing it. I've not gone and spent 6 months and $10,000 asking somebody to design some fancy specialist thing. I think these are used, I believe, in joining bits of flooring, and it's perfect for what we need. So I firmly believe in the idea of, even now, 3 years later, we try and recycle available things to get us learning, get us knowledge and lessons that help us on our way. So I think that's a critical part of the process.
And that's awesome. What's sort of the future you see for Gravity Industries and yourself?
Yeah, so when I developed this, I'd already spent 16 years in the City of London as an oil trader, and I did this just for the joy of the challenge. We've done now 108 events in 31 countries around the world, including India. We did TEDx in Mumbai, which is very cool. TEDx Gateway, that was very cool. And that has served really well to not only test the equipment in lots of different geographies, places like Dubai and the Arizona mountains and Johannesburg and Australia and all sorts of places, but that has also taught us a lot, that whenever we fly these live, even the CNN camera guys here just a second ago, they just lost their minds with seeing what it looks like to see a human flying in that kind of way. It doesn't look real. It looks way more spectacular live than it does even on a screen. So why not scale that into a race series? Why not have lots of guys and girls from different countries and different backgrounds all racing over water to keep it safe? And we were going to launch that in Bermuda in March, but COVID obviously has paused that. But that is also... Oh, I'm hearing myself for a second there. But our plan is to now just keep refining that, because COVID makes it very difficult. We're refining that in the background. But in parallel, apart from putting out lots of things on YouTube and things, we're also developing the system from a paramedic and search and rescue perspective, and also from the military point of view. All of those are quite diverse examples, but they all provide a rich opportunity to test the limits and push boundaries. And as I say, the next generation suit, this is the Mark II. The Mark III is secretly sitting over there, the other side of the camera. That starts in 10 seconds. It lifts 20 kilos more. It's neater and smaller, more compact. It's just an amazing leap compared to this. So all of those applications are ways to push the technology further forward.
And sort of that's what's sort of the future of human flight that you envision then, once you've built Gravity? So what's the future of human flight that you envision?
Yeah, and I don't really think that we are anytime soon going to be a mainstream form of transport. I mean, our electric version, there's a bit of an electric ducted fan version sitting right there, actually. That is going to spend its life for the next year or so being a trainer. So in other words, you run a low voltage power line down your tether and you learn to fly a jet suit, first of all, with the electric trainer. Unfortunately, batteries are not light enough. They're too heavy compared to how much energy they store. For us to really make use of them with the jet suit. But as that technology gets better, we're ready to adopt that. The electric system is going to be, probably a big part of where we go, with the future of this. But I think in terms of, in parallel with all of that, as we develop through that journey, I think even quicker than that, we're going to see somewhere in the world a real breakthrough in electric kind of pods, a bit like the advert for this whole event, that kind of autonomous electric drone-like pod that can just pick you up. You press on your phone and say, I want to go from here to here, and a bit like Uber, it finds you, takes you to where you want to go and drops you again. It's a solution to traffic and all sorts. But interestingly, the biggest hurdle to that becoming a reality is not the technology that exists now. It's the legislation and rules that are there to keep both the passengers and the people below these things safe. That's where the work's got to be done. That's going to take a while, I think, before the authorities around the world are rightly going to go and let these be used everywhere. That's
awesome to hear. I mean, obviously, loads of people, whoever sees Gravity, the first thing that they think in their mind is an Iron Man suit. So, do you think an Iron Man suit is a real possibility?
There you go. There's one there. We're guilty. We were given one by James, known as the Hacksmith on YouTube. We did some filming with him. That's a sort of fun little foldy up and down one. And that looks a bit like one, doesn't it, as well? Is an Iron Man pseudo reality? Well, there's a great story, which I can't really say is 100% factually correct, but I've heard it from a few people, where the US military took the Iron Man capability after the film was launched quite some years ago now, and sort of deconstructed it. And they proved that exoskeletons and situational awareness, heads-up display and body armor, exoskeletons, I think I mentioned that, all of those things are all quite possible. And to varying degrees, they've all been used a bit. The one capability they said was impossible was the flight thing, and they struck it off and said that would never be possible. So I love it when people say things can't be possible, because usually that suggests there's an interesting challenge. We are working with the militaries around the world because this does turn out to have real interesting application in that world. So I would say yes. I mean, lightweight bulletproof materials are now available. The new suit we've worked on has got enough power to lift all of that. We even did a great thing with 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃, you know this, 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃, flying the titanium printed Iron Man suit that 𝗵𝗶𝗃𝗃 built. That's on, you can see that at 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 on Instagram and other social channels. So I guess I have to say that, you know, a lot of the capability you see in the film is possible. Yeah. And especially with things like Alexa. In fact, I'm probably going to get Alexa talking to me now. She's flashing. Alexa and Siri and things like that exist. So you've got an in-head, you know, in-ear advisor as well. So yes, I guess a lot of it's quite possible now.
That's awesome. I've got a few more questions coming up on the live YouTube chat. So this guy called Nikhil asked, what was the sort of the motivation for you to start working on this project? What sparked the first idea?
The pure joy of the challenge. I am guilty of, throughout my life, of looking at interesting things. Like I took up ultramarathon running. I've run an 86-mile ultramarathon before, and lots of smaller ones. Joining the Royal Marines and getting my green beret. Setting up, there's another business I set up some time ago. Becoming an oil trader, all sorts of things. I guess I'm a bit of a glutton for a challenge. In other words, I really like looking at something and going, wow, that looks really cool. I wonder if I could do that, or even I wonder if that's even possible. I don't know about everybody listening, but I think everybody has a degree of this. Otherwise, why would you get off the couch and go and study? Try and get to university or take up a 5K park run. Most of us are wired to go, I wonder what's over the next hill. And this, for me, was one of those hills. I wondered whether this was possible. And if it was possible, I thought it'd be pretty cool.
That's awesome. Another Abhishek asks, has anyone got injured using the suit ever?
Nothing irreparable. So risk is an innate part of innovation and design and engineering. You end up taking risk with things you don't know how they're going to work out. But there's a critical rule, which is that when risk occurs, so when the outcome of risk manifests, then when something breaks or something goes wrong, you have to make sure that the downside is recoverable. It's a bit like running the old trading book I used to run. You take lots of trades and many of them don't work, but as long as enough have worked, they make you more money than you've lost, you survive. So in our world, there's a financial consideration, but actually it's mostly about safety. So this is why you see us not flying hugely high anywhere. There is no point, and it just gets exceptionally dangerous. You're gambling that there's never going to be a technical problem. It's very rare there is a technical problem, but when there is, the worst case scenario is you fall directly to where you were, onto grass or into water or possibly onto a hard surface. We're very well protected, and I must have fallen over at least 8, 9, 10 times. Again, on our YouTube, you can see some of the fails. I look for the fails video there. There's examples, but they're all, less dramatic than falling off a bicycle in a city. That's our ethos. It's impossible to make it perfectly safe. We don't fly high enough for a parachute. But we manage the risk as best we can. And also it's important to note the fuel in these is the equivalent of diesel. I mean, we can rerun on diesel. When I flew in Mumbai, for instance, that was diesel. Most events around the world, it was diesel. But in the UK, we tend to run on jet fuel, but jet fuel is virtually the same fuel as diesel. It's not gasoline or hydrogen or rocket fuel or anything terrifying like that.
That's awesome. I mean, we've got a few questions on height issues, but do we have plans with Gravity to deal with the height issues and then go higher and faster?
It's a very common question, like how high can you go? Are you really inspired to go really high? I think it's part of the human dream about flight. Firstly, oh, well done, you've got off the ground. That looks like a superhero or, flying like the birds. Now, how high can you go? I understand where that question comes from. I have to say, though, if you think about why, the only reason most aircraft fly really high is because the air gets thinner, so there's less air resistance, so you can go faster for the same fuel. For us, from an entertainment point of view, I get very boring if I go 300 feet. I become a little black dot, and I might as well be a drone. From a military point of view, there is no point. You're just a big target. And from a search and rescue point of view, again, there's no point. You're just further away from the casualty you're looking for. So actually, it's a bit boring, but when you really look at it, there's no need to go really high. And the challenge about making it safe is that if you had a parachute system with a rocket that could self-deploy and it would all be really super safe, you probably still need at least 80, 100, 200 feet for that to reliably have time to deploy, get the right orientation, and then, support you. A, what happens if your calculations are wrong and in one of the experiments that fails, you're probably dead. And B, you've still got to get to 80, 100 feet at minimum. And what happens if it fails? What happens if you get an engine failure at 50, 60, 70 feet? That's still probably a really bad day out. So for all of those reasons, we just don't go that high. Over water, you'll see us go a lot higher because that's, slightly less painful. So yeah, there's just not much of a need to do it.
That's all awesome to hear. So obviously we're here on this phone call for the challenge that we're launching with the Techfest, the Aero Vaccine Challenge. So could you just do the honors of sort of launching that challenge and letting the viewers know what the challenge is going to be about?
It's a pleasure to be part of this. I'm delighted that this competition is there. I think it's a great initiative. A big part of what we've tried to do around the world is to run with the enthusiasm and and excitement that this generates in young people and students. And it's for other people to say this, not me, but I do love it when people say they've been inspired to go into engineering or design or to take on challenges like this competition because they've seen what we've done and they've seen the development journey, which started very crudely with just experimentation. So it's a pleasure to be part of this, and to be launching this competition. I thoroughly encourage people to get behind it and to mostly enjoy the process and notice how the skills you learn and the processes you go through for something like this competition are entirely applicable to a career in engineering and design and innovation.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for launching the competition, and anyone who's watching this, the link to the competition will be available in the video description. I think we do have time for two or three more questions, which are just coming in. I'm watching them. There's a few interesting ones. Has any of the pilots done any interesting stunts in the suit? So, for example, can they do a loop?
Do a loop? No, we haven't yet. We haven't done a loop or those kind of rolls and things yet. The gymnastic capability of most of my team is much better than me, so I think it's entirely possible. The challenge it would be, so from a physics point of view, if you're throwing about 120, 140 kilos of thrust downwards, and the pilot with the fuel usually weighs about 100, 110, there's a lot of force there. As soon as you take away that thrust for even a second, you very quickly start accelerating that mass. And for the physics enthusiasts listening to this, you'll appreciate that to then redirect that thrust downwards again, it's got to do a lot of work for quite a while to decelerate and then restabilize that thrust. One of my team, Abhishek, this was Sam, did this calculation, worked out that if you jumped out of an airplane with a jet suit and then accelerated the engines, you'd need about a minute on full power pointed downwards to decelerate the natural momentum you'd have having achieved terminal velocity. So that you'd need a minute of that power. You see the power when I'm hovering, that's a lot of horsepower. You need a minute of that power directed downwards to decelerate your terminal velocity to come back into the hover again. So it's one challenge of trying to do a loop. I think you'd have to come down, you'd have to probably with some little wings, which we've flown with, to generate a bit of extra lift. You'd have to kind of come down, so accelerate up, start really generating a ton of speed upwards. And then just as you come to that kind of hover point, flip and then quickly try and get the thrust back downwards again. And I think you'd still see the pilot drop a lot. The challenge is, as you're experimenting doing this, each experiment is going to throw a jet suit in the water probably, which costs about $10,000 to repair. So it could be quite an experiment, but I think one day we'll get there.
One day. I mean, I'm sure the viewers would love to see that video come out whenever it comes out. I think we have time for one last question. What was your experience with the Bear Grylls like? because our viewers are asking that they've just seen that video, that post from Bear Grylls.
Yeah, so Bear only lives about an hour from where we are. He's done a lot of flight training now with us. He can fly really well. He put that out on his Instagram recently. There is a bunch more footage of showing me flying to his island. He actually has a real island, not full of members of the public trying to survive, an actual island with his little holiday house on it off the coast of the UK. I flew out to that island and I chased him around on a jet ski and flew back again. That will be out on YouTube again soon. So yeah, he's a really lovely guy. All credit to him that actually the real Bear is actually a really nice, great guy. You know, some people maybe not the same when you see camera versus real person, but he's a really lovely guy. He's a good friend. And he learned very quickly. And so did his eldest son as well. He can fly as well.
That is super awesome. I mean, thank you, Richard, for taking out the time to sort of come out and do this webinar. It was really awesome to hear all your thoughts and your journey with gravity. So I think that's all the time we have for this webinar today. Thank you very much for joining.
Pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Good luck with the competition.
All right, thanks.